the world's weather is getting wilder.
You know, the Earth is a very violent place. There are all kinds of natural processes happening all the time.
From terrifying tornadoes.
All I could see is this green wall. You couldn't see past it, around it, above it.
Those people gotta get out of here.
To horrifying hurricanes.
Just grew into this giant Category 5 monstrosity.
And record-breaking waves.
Bang! Shock all the way up my back. And then I had the washing machine effect.
To fast-moving walls of ice.
It's like a big snowball coming at you.
As the world warms up, we reveal gripping footage.
Oh my God, Starbucks just got blown over.
And first-hand accounts from people who are in the heart of these new extremes of weather.
The flash flood's right there!
As you're in the middle of this perfect storm of mud, you really have to focus on surviving.
We had passed the point of no return.
Call 911!
So shelter from the storm and hunker down for the world's wildest weather. Coming up, the worst cyclone in over 40 years hits Darwin, Australia.
Trees were coming down.
We were then effectively trapped.
Monsoon rains destroy Manila's neighborhoods.
A lot of people were just kind of stood with a sense of shock and awe.
But first, Canada's costliest ever natural disaster.
There was 40-foot walls of fire. This thing was a beast. It was living, it was breathing, it was moving, it was eating.
Fort McMurray, Canada. Situated in the northeast of Alberta, this remote community is surrounded by forests, which offer the city's 80,000 residents an outdoor lifestyle. Project manager James O'Reilly moved to the city nearly 20 years ago and lives here with his wife Candice.
This location we live in has many things I really like. Bears and deers and coyotes and everything come walking by our house. I can hit the trees within 2 minutes and be hiking for hours. But in the springtime, I'm a little bit nervous. The conditions change a lot. It's that time before the foliage starts coming out that I'm nervous about fires.
Wildfires are common in this part of Canada and allow the forest's ecosystems to stay healthy. Fort McMurray employs 150 firefighters to keep these fires at bay. Mark Stevenson is one of them.
We get fires every spring, generally to different scales. It could be a small one and we put out in a couple of minutes to something a little bit larger, but if anyone sees a wisp of smoke, they're calling the fire department and we're investigating right away.
Springtime 2016, and it's unseasonably warm and dry in Fort McMurray, with temperatures hitting the 80s.
The warm weather caused a lot of the deadfall and stuff in the bush to be excessively dry. We didn't have a lot of snow that winter, so there wasn't a lot of moisture in the ground to begin with. So we're anticipating a bad bushfire season.
Meteorologists believe the dry conditions are caused in part by a weather pattern known as the Omega Block, so named as it resembles the uppercase Greek letter Omega.
It's basically a ridge of high pressure that sits over the area and doesn't allow storm systems that would bring precipitation to come into that part of Canada. That meant a mild, relatively dry winter, and that meant that we had some problems come springtime.
These dry weather conditions result in wildfires springing up on the edge of the city by the 30th of April, although the firefighters seem to have the situation under control.
I was off duty and there was a fire on the Saturday evening, maybe a kilometer from my house. The pilots were dropping water, they were using bombers and choppers. The bombers were coming in so close that you could see the silhouette of the pilot through the window. It was just crazy. But that fire there was taken care of within probably a couple hours' time. So at that point it was, okay, the pressure's off. Sunday evening after supper, my family and I were taking a walk.
We happened to notice a little wisp of smoke down by the dump in the south direction that way.
It was just a tiny little wisp of smoke at the time, so it was no concern, but it was definitely noted.
2 days later, on May the 3rd, fires are continuing to burn just outside the territory of the Fort McMurray firefighters. And as Mark begins his shift, it's a day like any other.
It was a normal day. You know, I got up in the morning, my wife kissed me goodbye, I said goodbye to my kids, and off to work I went with my lunch and my workout gear. We did our training in the morning, we do our normal daily routine. We happened to notice, looking west near the dump, those new smoke piles every couple minutes getting closer and closer to the city. It seemed like the fire was taking great big steps. And then once we found out that the fire had jumped the river on the north side of town, that made it real.
With 3 areas of the town now on fire, Mark and his team leap into action.
A little wisp of smoke I saw Sunday evening that I thought nothing of the time ended up to be the beginning of the 2016 wildfires, one they call the Beast.
As the fire spreads to neighborhoods across the city, Fort McMurray's 80,000 residents have no idea the devastation that lies ahead. Winter 2015, and the United Kingdom is experiencing the wettest December ever on record. Numerous storms have brought in more than twice as much rain as normal, leaving much of the north of England underwater.
As a weather forecaster forecasting across northern England during that time, it was relentless. It was an exhausting season. Britain was really in the firing line for deep areas of low-pressure depressions which spawned across the Atlantic and just moved up towards the UK, one after another. We saw a number of storms in quick succession, causing quite a lot of localised flooding. And then leading up to Christmas, there was a bit of a lull, and we thought, oh, thank goodness for that.
But the reprieve isn't to last long. Hebden Bridge, West Yorkshire, England. Home to around 4,500 people, this pretty little market town lies in the upper Calder Valley, surrounded by steep hills and moorland. Lying on the banks of 2 rivers and a canal, water levels here are constantly monitored because of possible flooding. Ed Chadwick has lived here for 9 years and owns a gallery in the centre of town. He is very aware of the risks.
Living in a place like Hebden Bridge, where there's always inevitably going to be that potential for flooding, is something that you just have to live with, but it is always in the back of your mind.
So, as Christmas Day approaches and the rain is falling, Ed is keeping an eye on the weather.
I remember when I was closing up on the Christmas Eve, I actually physically went across the road, looked at the river and thought, it's about 1 metre up on normal. Fingers crossed it'll be all right. And so we went off as normal to enjoy the Christmas season.
However, Storm Eva has arrived from the Atlantic. Having already battered Ireland with its 85-mile-an-hour winds, Britain's Meteorological Office is predicting up to 5 inches of rainfall and has issued a red weather warning.
We could see that rain was going to last for quite some time. Not only that, the land was just so saturated, it didn't need 1 drop more of rainfall for the whole season. So as Eva pushed in, you could see there was trouble ahead.
As Boxing Day dawns, Hebden Bridge bears the brunt of Storm Eva, and residents across the town are awoken by a spooky sound.
One of the assets that is used in the Upper Calder Valley is flood warning sirens. They're particularly useful because in certain situations where flash flooding is imminent, they can alert a community at the push of a button.
One resident alerted by the alarm is Sarah D.
We went outside, out the back door, and lo and behold, there's the river. really high, really churning away. It just felt really dangerous and made you feel really insignificant. I got myself a GoPro for Christmas, so I decided to grab the GoPro and document it.
The rampaging river quickly swamps the town.
Just seemed to be water everywhere. And then we saw a freezer floating by in the distance and just could not believe what we're seeing. What on earth is that? Wow, it's a freezer.
As Sarah films the waters flowing through town, 15 miles away, Ed Chadwick has spotted the weather warnings and has rushed back to the gallery to save as much as he can.
Walked down the road and the apprehension, the worry was just, it was really quite awful. And as we approached, the river had diverted onto the road outside the gallery and it was like a raging torrent. We just looked across and thought, how are we going to get across there? So we kind of clung onto each other and waded across.
Ed begins to move the artwork to a higher part of the gallery, hoping to escape the ravages of the water.
It was just kind of all hands to pumps, really. We just had to move everything. And at that point, the river level is constantly rising outside. I'm kind of checking on it and watching it. The water just started bubbling up through the floor in either corner. And at that point, we just realized there was no way we were going to hold it out of the front. It had just found its way in. And in 20 minutes, it was up to the top step on the stairs here. The sense that you were in this glass box that was filling up with water, it was very scary. About midday, we'd managed to move everything. We couldn't do anything else. We just had to leave it to fate, really. And we suddenly had a realization of, well, we need to go and check on home, really.
By 1 p.m, much of Hebden Bridge's town centre is underwater, and most of the roads along the valley are impassable. As Ed approaches his house, he quickly realizes he can get no further.
The water level, it was at least 6 feet deep. And so we just knew that our lower space and all the things that we have in there, there was no saving. There was no getting across to even have a look.
Unable to reach his house because of the flooding, Ed has no idea when he'll be able to return home, or what he'll find there when he does. Darwin, the Northern Territory, Australia. On Christmas Day 1974, the city was hit by Cyclone Tracy, a Category 4 storm with winds of over 200 kilometres an hour.
Cyclone Tracy was a very significant storm, and it's one that stuck in the Australian psyche. Destroyed a capital city, and it precipitated the largest peacetime evacuation in Australia's history, and it's really shocked the nation.
Cyclone Tracy reduced 85% of the city to rubble and killed over 70 people. It's still considered to be the most destructive cyclone in Australia's history. In the years that followed, Darwin's buildings were rebuilt to withstand strong future winds, but the city's residents were left with indelible memories.
The mark and the legacy of Tracy is such that the city does become on edge whenever there are cyclones around. In the blink of an eye, they can go from relatively benign Category 1 systems to very strong city-killing Category 5s.
March 2018, and meteorologists spot a cyclone forming in a similar area to Tracy. They issue warnings to Darwin's residents, leaving Aaron Kling, his partner Connor McBride, and their young family with a decision to make.
The expectation the day before was that it was going to be a Category 1 and it might be just basically nothing more than a big storm with a lot of rain. We know that this house is probably pretty structurally sound. It's made of brick, so we decided to stay here.
I was feeling apprehensive, but we'd been through a cyclone before and we felt confident that we could make it through.
Despite not being too worried about the Category 1 cyclone, Aaron and Connor don't leave anything to chance.
We started getting a bit of a cyclone plan together. I started charging my torches and some of our phones and things.
I'd been to the supermarket and bought some non-perishables, made sure that we had clean clothes, so if there were power outages and such, we would have a few days' provisions.
Tropical cyclone Marcus is forecast to hit Darwin as a Category 1 storm in the early evening of the 17th of March. But in the run-up to its arrival, meteorologists spot its route changing.
Usually when cyclones interact with land and cross land, they cut off from their ocean supply of energy and they begin to decay. But this didn't happen with Marcus. As a quirk of fate, it crossed through a water channel. It sort of threaded the needle between the Tiwi Islands and the Coburg Peninsula. And as such, it enjoyed an energetic path on its way to Darwin.
Marcus's new route across the sea forces meteorologists to change their forecast.
It became apparent that the cyclone was stronger than we were anticipating. So lo and behold, when Darwin awoke on the morning, they found themselves presented with a Category 2 system rather than the Category 1.
Not only has the intensity of the cyclone increased, the time of its arrival has moved forward from early evening to mid-morning.
When I woke up, I was looking out and I could see that the trees were kind of like blowing and the breeze quite strong.
I realised that the wind was really picking up, the rain was starting to really come down.
It was really grey and windy and wet outside.
The cyclone's premature arrival means it's now too late and too dangerous for the family to escape. It's a race against time to secure their home.
I started to panic a little bit. All of a sudden had to go into kind of get organised mode.
That's when I kind of asked him to go out into the yard and make sure we were prepared.
And then that's when I started throwing things in the pool. When there's a cyclone, you gotta throw shit in the pool. I've often heard that if you put it in the pool, it's not likely to go flying around. So I threw the garden chairs in the pool and the towel rack, and then I just tidied the backyard up a bit.
After stormproofing the garden as best he can, Aaron retreats to the safety of his house, where he continues to film.
Once I started seeing the wind whipping up, I was like, this is something that might be pretty full on. I thought this is worth documenting for posterity.
This cyclone's going to do a lot of damage to Darwin.
As the winds begin to intensify, Aaron and Connor have no idea what damage this cyclone might inflict. Tuesday, May the 3rd, 2016, and a fire, which will come to be known as the Beast, is threatening to engulf the city of Fort McMurray in Canada. Concerned by the rapid spread of the flames, firefighter Mark Stevenson calls his wife and tells her to leave town with their children immediately.
I needed them to be gone. I needed to know they were safe. Once I had that peace of mind, once I knew my family was safe, it was easy to do my job.
Meanwhile, project manager James O'Reilly is at work and has just received a disturbing message.
My wife sent me a picture of looking from downtown up into our neighborhood, and you could see the smoke and the red flames over top of our community. And it was that point I knew we needed to get out of there.
James and his wife rush home to prepare to leave town, unaware how rapidly the fire is spreading.
By the time I get to our house, they're actually saying, evacuate. And then by the time we got our first load out, they're saying, get out now. So for me, the urgency was really strong.
Evacuation orders are issued for the entire city, leaving James and his wife wondering the best way out.
I was thinking to myself, I think that south seems to make sense if the traffic is clear.
That's us driving.
We could see all the way down the highway and it seemed to be moving fine. So I decided to go south. So as soon as we started going up the hill to get out of town, the traffic just stopped. We couldn't move anywhere.
We're trying to get through with fire trucks around these traffic jams and to get to where we need to be. It was hectic. There was people escaping, there's people driving everywhere. It was scary.
It was like something out of a movie. And all of a sudden you can see flames start coming through the houses.
The wall of fire was, 20 feet from vehicles. It was intense.
As the ferocious flames spread, 80,000 terrified residents tried to leave the city.
It was dark behind, and you could see embers in the wind. And then when we went through the fire itself, pitch black, couldn't see a thing. All I could see in the rearview mirrors was the embers hitting the side of the trailer. What was going through my head was that yeah, we're gonna find out what it's like to burn, right? And yeah.
After a hair-raising half-hour drive that feels like a lifetime, James and his wife successfully flee from the city.
When we came out of the smoke, I don't know how to explain it, but it didn't matter how much money we had or what we had. We were alive, anything was possible.
With no possibility of returning to their house that night, James and his wife decide to bed down at a nearby campsite. But their troubles aren't over yet. Boxing Day, 2015, and the town of Hebden Bridge in West Yorkshire is underwater, affecting hundreds of residents and 80% of the town's businesses. There is so much rainfall that the Environment Agency is struggling to measure the water levels.
It was difficult in some locations to get exact figures for the river levels due to the gauges themselves being underwater or reading the maximum value they had ever read. That in itself shows you the extent of flooding.
Local business owner and resident Ed Chadwick is one of those hit by the flooding. Although he's been able to save much of the artwork in his gallery, the high water levels have prevented him from getting home. So he spent the night at a friend's house.
The next morning we got up quite early, looked out of the window, and we could see that thankfully the floodwaters overnight had subsided. And we knew that then we'd have to go and have a look at home and see what the situation was there.
As Ed makes his way back through the town, the impact of the flood is evident.
We're wading through, this silt, and it's thick, it's black, it's sticky, gloopy stuff. And we get to the back door, the frame has swollen. And so literally, I have to kick the back door in to get into the house. All your possessions that are in that area are just ruined.
The Boxing Day floods have damaged both Ed's gallery and home. 2 days later, he plucks up the courage to visit his allotment.
If you can imagine the space down here, it was a good perhaps 10 feet above my head in water, which when we stand down here today is just incomprehensible. All the raised beds had gone, literally everything had just been washed away. It was really devastating and incredibly upsetting. It really struck struck your heart.
In the weeks and months that follow, the residents of Hebden Bridge pulled together to get the town up and running again.
Everybody came out. Everybody was clearing up, mucking out sludge out of people's houses, giving people somewhere to stay for the night, making dinners. It was a really good feeling from the community.
1,000 businesses in the Calder Valley area are affected by the flooding, with around 300 of them in Hebden Bridge. Although many don't open until March 2016, just a month after the water subsides, Ed's Art Gallery is back up and running.
Our priority was getting the gallery back open because, of course, it's our livelihood. Without that, we have no income.
It does, however, take Ed 6 months to restore his allotment to its original state.
To see that devastation after Boxing Day really did affect us, and we just made the decision that, you know, we just had to bring it back for our own sanity and peace of mind, really.
Hebden Bridge is only one of several towns and cities that flood during the storms of December 2015. 3 years on, however, the little town is back on its feet, and Ed continues to live there.
Afterwards, you did think, why are we living here? Why are we living somewhere where we have to deal with this kind of scenario? But we took a walk up onto the hillside, and it was a beautiful sunny day. And when you get days like that, it's a beautiful place to be. And it made you want to continue and try and move on from the devastation, really.
Australia, March 2018. It's around 10:30 in the morning, and Cyclone Marcus, now a Category 2 storm, has just made landfall near Darwin. Its 130-kilometre-an-hour wind gusts are battering the city as Aaron Kling, Connor McBride and their daughter hunker down inside their home.
When we looked out the window and saw the trees blowing sideways, we knew we were in the thick of Marcus.
The wind had whipped up a lot and it was starting to howl a bit, and there was just massive wind gusts going through the yard.
The gusts came in kind of ebbs and flows. You'd hear a really big one and with some significant howling, and then it would ease off, and then that kind of got more constant as we got into the real thick of the storm.
Water's coming in the house.
We had water coming in under the floor and it was flooding in here, so we had to keep grabbing towels and putting them down. So we knew we were in something pretty serious.
The most unsettling thing was not knowing whether or not the trees immediately around our house were going to come down.
So our fences come down, the bamboos come down now on the fence.
As we were sitting here on the couch, we heard this loud bang, and we got up, and it turned out that a tree had snapped in half and landed on the roof, so we went down to the end room.
Let's just stay in this room.
It wasn't safe to go outside, and we couldn't see beyond our kind of front patio area because of all the trees that had come down.
Hold steady, mango tree.
As the storm continues to hammer their home, the power supply in the house is suddenly cut off. Aaron risks going outside to see what has happened.
Trees come down on our mains power.
A tree had come down on the power line and squashed it between that and my vehicle, my work vehicle, so we were then effectively trapped because both our cars in the driveway were trapped, so we couldn't go anywhere.
After around an hour of slamming their home, Cyclone Marcus's winds begin to die down. Aaron and Connor assess the damage.
Torn off some of the fascia here. A lot of the trees have come down. It's pretty destructive. This one snapped clean in half. It's our power line been taken down over here.
The cyclone has brought down trees all around Aaron and Connor's house. But they quickly realise their front yard has taken the biggest battering.
Look at that front yard. Thank you, Cyclone Marcus.
I was really surprised at the level of destruction to our garden. We had quite a lush tropical garden out the front with lots of trees and shrubs, and they were pretty much all wiped out.
Luckily, Aaron and Connor's friends rally round to give them a hand.
We were really overwhelmed with joy when some people rocked up with their chainsaws and just started helping. That was such a lovely thing that they did for us.
Our front area is a bit more breezy and airy now. In this tropical heat, that helps.
Cyclone Marcus leaves a mass of destruction in its wake. Insurance claims exceed 85 million Australian dollars.
Unfortunately, yeah, all the big mahoganies came down.
It was quite dramatic because they have these big root systems that were exposed all across the city.
Fortunately, no one dies as a result of the cyclone. But 44 years after Cyclone Tracy, Marcus leaves its own stamp.
Cyclone Marcus was a timely reminder that the city needs to and has to remain vigilant when it comes to tropical cyclones in northern Australia.
I wouldn't take the risk of staying here during a 4 or 5. The fact that it was a 1 that turned into a Category 2 at the last minute was enough. Come on, sweetie, let's go back inside.
Manila, the Philippines. With over 70,000 people per square kilometre, this is one of the world's most densely populated cities. Situated close to the equator, the area is hot all year round, but has 2 distinct seasons, rainy and dry. The weather in the area is determined by a seasonal change in the direction of the wind, known as monsoons.
Monsoons are caused by a contrast in temperature between the ocean and the land. So during the summer, the land has a relatively higher temperature than the ocean, causing air to rise there, leaving a kind of like a suction vacuum in its place. That begins the movement of air from the ocean into the land surface. Now, when that moist, warm air from the ocean arrives on the land, storms that form can produce the wildest rainfall seen all over the planet.
Plus, your monsoon season, when it overlaps with the typhoon season, means that if your island happens to be in the middle of those two interacting, then you're going to have, we'll call it a catastrophic coincidence.
August 2012, and forecasters are warning of one of these catastrophic coincidences in Metro Manila. Extreme weather cameraman James Reynolds is on standby in Hong Kong and decides to check it out.
Normally I film typhoons or hurricanes or volcanic eruptions, but this was the first time I'd specifically gone somewhere just to film flooding. And I knew that it would be an interesting place to film a flood story. So I jumped on a plane, headed down there and got shooting.
After landing safely in Manila, James drives straight into town.
The water level was starting to rise, and we need to be really careful here that we can keep our vehicle out of the floodwaters and we don't kind of swamp our car and get ourselves into trouble.
It's estimated 80% of the city is underwater. The residents deal with the arrival of these unusual floods in their own different ways.
Manila is a city with a lot of unsupervised kids who hang out on the street, and these girls and boys were having a great time. These kids have a hard, challenging life, so it kind of gave them an opportunity to forget about the usual troubles they have to deal with every day, and these kids were having a blast. There are also lots of other people trying to go about their daily lives. A lot of the taxi drivers and the tricycle drivers make a living being on the road, so they were struggling to continue to do their work. It was thriving humanity going on whilst all the crazy floodwaters were rising up.
Manila is home to nearly 13 million people, many of whom live in neighborhoods on the banks of the Marikina River.
This is where I saw the worst damage. There were whole slum communities which had been submerged in water, people whose houses are being flooded out. A lot of people were just kind of stood by the side with a sense of shock and awe. Just trying to take in what was going on.
This devastating flooding is the result of more than a month's worth of rain falling in just 48 hours over the Manila City area.
What was unusual about this event is that it wasn't just about the monsoon, which in and of itself can be destructive with heavy rainfall in an already tropical environment. It's that you had two other tropical cyclones in the vicinity that added fuel to the storm, that allowed for there to be a prolonged period of very heavy rainfall over the course of more than a week.
But even when the rain stops, the 29-degree heat exacerbates the problems for Manila's residents.
The water was starting to fester. It was really unpleasant. So a lot of trash got washed up. The sewage was all mixed up together. This was a serious health hazard. There was a lot of scavenging going on, people wading through stagnant floodwaters looking for anything useful they might be able to salvage. And there were people trying to scoop the water out of their houses. And there were a lot of rescues taking place to get the elderly away from the danger areas. And it was clear that for a lot of these people, it was not going to be easy to get their lives back on track quickly.
The floods of August 2012 are one of the worst three-day rainfall events on record, killing over 100 people and displacing over 1 million inhabitants. Even today, the amount of rain that fell is deemed to be unusual.
An academic study suggested it was so rare that you could see an event like this happen maybe once every 1,000 years, which goes to show just how unprecedented it was and how unusual the setup was. Perfect ingredients were all there for this terrible flooding situation.
May 2016, and fires are raging across Fort McMurray in Canada. With 80,000 residents having been evacuated, firefighters are struggling to stop the flames from engulfing the entire city.
There was 40-foot walls of fire. This thing was a beast. It was living, it was breathing, it was moving, it was eating. It was incredible to see. We couldn't get ahead of it, we couldn't stop it. It was going and doing what it wanted to do. It seemed like we were losing every battle. We were losing entire areas of the community.
The rapid spread of the fire is due to the weather conditions.
What happened right as the fire started and began to spread was a cold front came through, and that brought with it wind that caused the fire itself to spread more rapidly, and wind remained the constant problem for this fire even after the cooler temperatures arrived.
Two residents who have fled the city are James and Candice O'Reilly. They've made it to a campsite just outside Fort McMurray.
We just parked the vehicles and the trailer in one of the spots there. The phone almost immediately started vibrating.
James's phone is linked up to the security cameras at his home, and if they sense motion, the phone vibrates to alert him.
The front camera was telling me there's something going on, and I could see just glitter across the grass, and that's when I realized that was fire. So I said to Candice, I think that's the house going. And she said, no, it's not. I said, yeah, it is. Let me show you what it looks like inside. So I opened the camera to the inside security camera. At that point, we could see the flames licking the side of the house.
It takes around 3 minutes for the fire to smash through the window and engulf the front room.
And at that point, Candice couldn't watch anymore. Yeah, so I watched the house burn from there. It was a weird moment for me. But I was so happy we were okay. So it didn't impact me at that time. It impacted me later, but at that point, we figured it was time to move on.
It's the tree line right adjacent to my house.
Meanwhile, back in Fort McMurray, firefighter Mark Stevenson is continuing to battle the beast, which has now reached his own neighborhood.
I talked to my captain I was driving around with, and I said, "Can we stop back over on the south side of my house and see where the fire's progressed to?" And he said, "Yeah, let's go ahead." And we drove down my street, and I happened to notice that on my street, my house was the first one fully engulfed. And that's my house on fire there, a picture of that. That moment, it was kind of, numbing's the wrong word. I had expected it coming up there, but to see it was totally different. It was shocking. Everything that was important, was my wife, my kids, my dog, everything that couldn't be replaced was safe. Everything else was just stuff, and stuff can be dealt with later. I took my phone out and I took a short video of it, and that was about it. There's a video I sent to my wife of our house on fire, the little message I had for her.
As Mark's home burns to the ground, he throws himself back into his work.
My first day, I worked 22 hours. Got a couple hours sleep and got up to work the next day. We all worked crazy hours like that for the first couple days, and that was because we wanted to, it was because we had to. It wasn't until day 3 where we figured things out to how to deal with this beast. We had fought probably a lifetime worth of fires in 30 hours time. It was crazy.
The Fort McMurray fires rage on for days, and as they spread, they produce their own weather system.
The fire was big enough to create its own weather. That is not uncommon when you get a wildfire to be large enough to create its own storms. With the warm, rising smoke, it will then form towering thunderstorms, which are usually dry, of course, because it's not tapping into moisture, but it will create lightning, which can then spark other fires.
It takes 2 months for the Fort McMurray fires to be declared under control. They destroy nearly 10% of the city and cause an estimated $3.6 billion worth of damage, making them the most expensive natural disaster in Canadian history.
Thinking back on it, caused some anxiety for me sometimes. I never want to fight a fire like that again. Firefighters don't like to lose houses. That's not what we do. We do everything we can for our community. This is a jar of leftovers from my house that we managed to dig out of the ash. A couple coins, a couple burnt out knives, remnants of my old military medals. This jar was left as my house.
Despite their losses, in the months that follow, Mark, James, and their families return to rebuild their lives in Fort McMurray.
When we came back, it was surreal in the way that you always have landmarks to judge things by, and all the landmarks were gone. It was just flat. It was just foundations burnt. It felt very strange, but we rebuilt here because this plot of land is really meant for us. We can go out the back gate and we hit the trees, and I can hit trails and walk, and I love it that way.
There was never any point where I didn't want to rebuild here. This is my little area of Fort McMurray. I love my little top of the hill house here. My wife and I, we sit on the patio all the time and we reflect. We look out over the city and we're thankful to be back home. We're just thankful for everything we have.